Innovative.
Dynamic.
Gritty.
Determined.
Warrior.
This podcast is about the innovators,
the leaders on the front lines of adversity,
the all-around good people doing good deeds.
They are the civic warriors of the world.
Witham's guests are the leaders in the nonprofit industry affecting change.
They try, they fail, they overcome.
Through their stories, we can join forces to become civic warriors.
Hey Warriors, today's guest on Witham Civic Warriors is Tom Zaki, founder and CEO of TerraCycle Inc. and board chair of the TerraCycle Global Foundation. When thinking about our world and the environment, we often take for granted one important concept, and that's garbage. When you eat half a hot dog and throw it away, where does it go? When you have a nice cold Pepsi bottle and throw it in the recycling can, where does it go? Does it actually get recycled? Is there a better way to actually treat waste? How much does our consumer behavior actually drive the creation of waste, and is there something that we can do to change that? Tom is a pioneer in this space and has written several books on the topic of rethinking about waste, and his company, TerraCycle, is doing just that. One really important factor is the level of control we have about how to shape our future. If every human on this earth did their small part, we could make a huge difference. If we change how we buy and what we buy, we can make an impact. If we are conscious about where the garbage goes and make better decisions on where it goes, we can change the world together. Have you ever heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? If not, you should. You should understand that every piece of plastic you throw away ends up somewhere, and a lot of it ends up in waterways and oceans. And depending on where you live, in a developed country or a developing country, the consequences grow exponentially. The TerraCycle Global Foundation was formed in 2018 with a mission to address the complex challenges of collecting and recycling waste in emerging countries and communities. The TerraCycle Global Foundation engages with local communities in emerging regions to offer collection and recycling platforms for waste, with a special emphasis on preventing plastic pollution from entering our aquatic systems. Their inaugural platform was launched in Thailand and collects plastics from rivers and canals before it ends in our oceans by leveraging a fleet of locally constructed and serviced river cleanup systems. Their efforts are making a significant difference in the world. Acknowledging the impact we have through our buying habits is huge. So Tom, in your opinion, do you feel big businesses truly have control over our behaviors to the extent of influencing our level of waste output?
Big companies are not in the business, right, to give us what we don't want, because convincing us to do what we don't want is incredibly difficult to do. It's much easier to figure out what we want and then to give that to us in the most convenient, affordable, and amazing way. And if you're really a genius, you'll figure out what we want that we don't yet know we even want. That would be like the most genius level of this. So here's why that's important. We control, what is out there, right? And this is one of the, I love this when I travel, is to go into a supermarket, because when you look at a supermarket and you look at what is on the shelf, that is a direct reflection of those people's desires who live there. And it's not just what is on the shelf, but how much of what is on the shelf is on the shelf. It's and if we stop buying a certain thing, less of that will appear, and more will appear of what we do buy. And this is the crazy part, is that we feel like we have no control, yet we have objectively all the control. And this is important because we're driving this immense vehicle, this immense, system blindly. So it's not like we have to get away from this whole we are sheep to the slaughter and shift our perspective to we are in fundamental control, and then respect that control. It's sort of like, we are taught to be mindful and respect when we drive a car, because that's a big object that can kill people if we drive it incorrectly. So we are conscious, we are aware, we even have a license to operate, right? We need to do the same when we consume, because we are driving an even more destructive vehicle. And the last thing we can do is sit there and say, we have zero control, because that is like driving completely blindly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, because there's so many factors in all of this to consider, and we didn't even get into it yet, but even like thinking about like policy, right? And you think about policies around the world, and the fact that different locations, different places have different policies and different viewpoints. And right now where we are in the United States, I'm sure we have a completely different viewpoint from a governmental and policy level than certain other countries, given everything we read right now. and it's how do you bring all these things together, right? How do you change consumer behavior? How do you change policy? How do you change, as you said, structurally, infrastructure wise? How do you just change the simple infrastructure of, hey, maybe we should, maybe we should rethink how we have landfills. Obviously that's one solution to it in the sense that that's how people view it, but how do you reconcile all of that and bring that all together to make the better world, right?
Yeah, so that it sounds complicated, right?
It
And
does to me.
but I think
My simple brain can't wrap itself around
well,
it.
let me give it a shot, right? I think that the way you do that is the one person we can affect is ourselves, right? And we start by changing how we behave. And that's in it's simple in this world of physical, like environmental damage and garbage, it's what we buy. It's the one behavior we have to affect. So we start changing that. Then we, maybe influence our friends, our family to, to maybe think about similar choices. And why is that the one and only genesis point? Because policy is just popularity. Usually what becomes law is what is popular. So give you a good example, right? Like suddenly, we were outraged because on our Facebook feeds, we started seeing, turtles with straws up their nose. Those happened objectively in around 2018.
Mhm.
And we all got pissed off. And we got pissed off loudly. Politicians who are basically in the business of popularity, right? They get their job based on popularity, and then they maintain their job based on popularity. They are in the business of popularity. Saw that it's a very popular thing to hate straws, and so they pass laws in certain states to ban them. That's it, right? That is how most legislation is created, is what is popular, right? And so that may seem vapid, but it is what it is. So what makes popularity is you starting something, me thinking it's cool, following you, and then our friends following suit, and suddenly we wake up and that shit's popular. And then laws get passed, businesses react, infrastructure is enabled, and we've woken up in a whole new situation, right? It's actually really, it is a complex, crazy thing, but it begins with that. And why that is so important is because without that personal action to change, all we're doing is hoping others will. And then we're paralyzed, right? So that's what we can do where we are today. Then, if we want to broaden that, and think about how to go beyond that and sort of look at other things, it's how can we influence the world in what we do? So we can influence in where we work, and we can try to bring the same type of change to our vocation, whether we work, no matter where we work, right? We can start then influencing that organization and trying to do the same effect, not on a personal level, but on an organizational level. And same thing goes, make it popular and other organizations start following. And then, we can broaden even more to think about how can we then, help or bring, these sort of thinking, to places that are really disadvantaged and may not even have the ability to think about these things at the moment because maybe their minds are focused on things that are, that's more directly affecting, their ability to survive. This is where, this is for us, it was one thing to do all this in developed countries, right? At least what we try to do through TerraCycle, and it's worked, and so on, and growing. But why it was so important to create a foundation is because we were looking at, some of these places around the world where we really wanted to work, and there was no other way to do it than do it through a NGO, model. But I think that's the sort of order of what we do it in. And then what's nice about that is it's greatly simplifying all this ridiculous complexity and sheer scale of the issue.
Right. How so? From what perspective when you say it's
If we
simplified?
simplify down that we sort of focus it on what we can do as our actions, right?
Right.
Then it distills down. You don't have to think about, like, if you simplify all environmental harm down to the act of consumption, you don't have to understand the difference between fracking and different types of energy consumption. Just consume less energy, right? You don't have to think about the externalities of let's say free range farming for cattle versus slaughterhouse farming. Don't do either, just don't eat meat, and then you don't have to think about the impacts of either, right? It actually becomes a really distilling approach, and suddenly the overwhelming, like, what do I do, it's so ridiculous of a problem, goes away, and it's actually quite clarifying.
Right. Yeah, there's no question about that. And thank you for explaining that, because I think the more you break it down to that simple level, I think the more that you realize how much control we have overall over it.
We have
So
all of it. Yeah.
yeah. So from your perspective, I think what what opened my eyes, I think, a little bit more, and I think what's somewhat relevant to this discussion is, looking at some of the I don't want to say financial metrics, but some of the statistics or information that help people understand, the monumental issue that you are currently solving and trying to solve, and understanding that, the sheer magnitude of the issue at hand, right? I think when I read about, and you mentioned it a little bit, but when you hear about I think they call it the Pacific garbage patch. Like when you hear about that and you realize that, I think you mentioned somewhere that it's the size of Texas and it's 10 meters deep, and it's like,
Yeah.
wait, what? Like,
Well,
where is this?
it's
And
nuts. Yeah. And it's not just, it's as more science has been done on it.
Mhm.
Here's the crazy part. We've been doing work, in ocean plastic all over the world, collecting it and processing it into new packaging. I mean, here's a bottle. This is a dish soap bottle, #1 dish soap in Europe, where you can sort of see it's made from ocean plastic, and
Sure.
we're the ocean plastic sort of supply chain there. Long story short, the more we learn about it, the more we've realized it's not just one garbage patch. It's literally everywhere. I mean, it's already in our drinking water. I mean, literally, if you're drinking water, there's microplastic in it today.
Oh,
And
wow.
there is that level of plastic pollution in all aquatic systems everywhere. There may be different density, like, certain hotspots, but if you go to the Mediterranean, it's covered in garbage. If you go to, places you wouldn't expect, off the coast of Canada, there's garbage washing up. It's absolutely everywhere. There's a great quote from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that there'll be more plastic in the sea than fish by weight in 2050, and that's really happening, and it's only accelerating, right? And it's happening because, and look, we can point today to emerging countries and say, shame on you, Thailand and Cambodia and Laos, and but it's put into perspective. The city of New York used to take all of its garbage 10 miles offshore and dump it until 1980.
Yeah,
I mean,
which wasn't
until
that long
1980.
ago.
I mean, that's within our lifetimes, more or less, right? I mean, that's nuts. And yes, in developed countries, because of our wealth, we were able to afford to stop and pay, the higher prices to landfill, which is basically putting all our garbage in one place, like controlled litter, or incinerate, which is burn for energy, or recycle, which is recover the material. We've been able to do that, which are luxuries. And now, a lot of that is happening in other parts of the world, but we've been using the ocean as our landfill. And
Yeah,
it's
terrifying.
horrible. It's terrible. I mean, it's not just, the strange part is humanity tends to come to these things selfishly first. And I know it sounds horrible, but like if you take the organic food movement, you want to guess? I mean, you may know, but just sort of throw a question to you. What is the #1 reason people go to organic?
Because it sounds good.
Ashley, you said because it sounds
Perceived,
good?
perceived
Yeah.
quality, perceived quality and lifestyle of the livestock before you eat it.
You guys are way too awesome. No, absolutely not. What is the most selfish reason you go to organic?
Because
That
it's
happens.
hip and cool, and it adds to the image of whatever you're trying to be, something along those lines.
It's the #1 reason. Statistically, everywhere in the world, people transition into organic is because they perceive it as more healthy for them. That's the most
Oh,
selfish,
no.
right? It's
Right.
Okay.
it's not the birds and the butterflies and the bees and any of that stuff, which is what it should be about. It's about, I will be healthier. That's why people choose organic, or my kids will be healthier, right?
Huh.
And people moving to organic because of something that isn't a selfish reason is in the single-digit percentages. Right now, Ashley, what you said about like coolness is a selfish reason. That's in the same bucket, right? So it's personal health, maybe it's my perception, but it's all about me, right? That's why we switch, right? And this is sort of one of the interesting things in the environmental movement and the social, sort of business movement is you have to unfortunately play into that, right, to get people to do more benevolent actions. And it's unfortunately the way the world works, but it's good to at least be eyes open to it,
Definitely.
I think, yeah, and that to be honest, was one of the main reasons why, we started running with a podcast, with working with not-for-profit organizations and working with, charitable mindsets and people like yourself that are, addressing some of these bigger issues in a real way. And it really opens your eyes when you understand and just understand very simple facts like that, like just understanding the why behind consumer behavior, the why behind why a problem exists, the why behind why we don't fix it, the why behind economically why it makes sense or doesn't make sense. I think all of those things are so relevant in actually solving these issues, and they're all very simple things. And we all get so caught up in our, in this thing, and we're like, oh yeah, this thing is God. When you talk about atheism, this thing's God now, and it's
Yes.
it's awful. But at the same token, you're right. It's how many likes can I get on Instagram because I put this picture of this organic food that I'm eating.
Well, and I think the biggest lesson I've learned in running or chairing a foundation and running a social business is we need to, as actors in that space, right, to really scale what we do and scale the purpose, right? We have to influence folks to either donate money or to somehow get involved. You can't do it on your own. You have to basically be out there advocating for people to get involved. And the biggest unlocking principle I've learned in doing this is that you have to empathize with how they see the world, even if you don't agree with it, right? Because we sometimes are sort of holier than now, and it's like, why don't you see it our way and live in in the way the world we see it? It's much more powerful to say, I'll accept the way you see the world, not just accept it, I'll empathize with it, which is way more powerful than acceptance. And I'm going to show you why helping my cause, whether for the TerraCycle Foundation, it has to do with, solving river plastic in Thailand or, other types of waste in India or whatever it may be, how that will help you forward your approach to the world. But I'm not going to ask you to change your point of view on it because that's so immensely difficult.
That seems like the best approach, but it's also so much more of a difficult approach because you think when you talk about the discussion of garbage, why it's bad, and you talk to people or talk to us, and then people hear the conversation of how vastly garbage is impacting the world. And even like you said, this was an issue, a huge issue, things that people wouldn't have even thought were that big of an issue up until 20 years ago. There were things going on that were so devastating, like people don't even believe that. So you think hearing those things would be enough, but it's actually not enough, which is the craziest part. You say there's so much devastation, there's so much harm, there's so much pollution, and it's affecting XYZ. That's not even enough. It's almost like, how do you make that topic cool to the masses? How does that trigger with them so that they then do something? Because the issue alone doesn't do it.
Oh gosh, you're right.
A lot of times.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it has to be cool, like on trend, which is such a horrible way to look at it, right? It's
exactly.
And it has to be highly personal, right? Like, what got the plastic movement going? One was, the sort of zeitgeist raising of what Blue Planet do. Two, as a film did that Sir David Attenborough put out, the turtles with straws up their nose, all those social media images of when you cut a fish open, it's covered in plastic. That's one major thing. And then the other was the fact that there's microplastic in everything now. I mean, it's in our water, which is a very personal sort of thing. It's like the organic food thing. It made it very personal. I think those two things together are incredibly powerful forces to make us change. Because the moment we start talking about big atrocities, what's the difference between big, very big, and ridiculously big? It's our minds can't grapple with it. It's all the same. And then if it's not right in front of us or affecting us, the world is so big, it's hard to keep that in our minds and keep it relevant, where maybe in our day-to-day lives, we don't see it right in front of us. And I think that becomes a critical aspect to keep highlighting and focusing on. And it's challenging sometimes in the work, especially in social enterprise, where it's like focusing on the things that, like you were saying, Ashley, on trendy or personal. It may be like, why am I spending time on that? How is that important? But it is so important to build the movement.
It's almost like we need influencers, like Instagram models, to take over this movement, Fire Festival style.
Right? Yeah, totally. But in a non-fire festival type of way, right? Yeah.
Right.
Much more successful
way to approach it, but great idea.
Yeah, no, exactly right. I think we have to look at those things, and we shouldn't frown on them. We should say those are the tools of our moment. and how do we leverage those tools, to create the best possible outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with that, just under, I think the personal connection, I've done surveys before, and that's always the number one reason why people give to charity, and also the number one reason why people want to address an issue is either personally affected, whether it's, someone in my family had cancer, so I want to support a cancer society, or someone in my immediate circle was affected, or in my backyard there's a big pile of garbage that, it every day affects me. That personal connection, I think, is the main reason that why people donate and why people kind of help charities. And what's interesting about it, I think what I'm curious about is how do we bring that relevance with what you're doing with the foundation to, the audience? And I think putting perspective to it, what is, when you say there's a lot of plastic in a river in Thailand, what does that look like? Like,
Oh my God, yeah. To give you a visual, now it depends on the river and it depends on the time, but there are moments where you can't see the water. It is just covered in plastic, top to bottom, right? And then you may say to yourself, well, that's all the way literally around the world in Thailand. Like, how does that,
Sure.
affect me if I'm in Ohio, right? But one of the amazing things about our aquatic system is that the amount of movement of this material, a piece of packaging out of, say out of a river in Bangkok could easily wash up, on a beach in Florida. And not only will that happen, but it's going to degrade because it's going to be eaten up by fish, by microorganisms. It's going to degrade because of all the bacteria and the UV light that it has exposure to, and it's going to dilute into the water. That's going to be eaten by fish that we eat. I mean, the fish we eat, no matter where we are, comes from all over the world. I mean, we're literally eating the stuff. It's going to end up in our water, and it's just going to become an omnipresent part of our lives, increase cancer rates. I mean, isn't it amazing that cancer rates used to be going down for a while, and recently they started increasing? And I'm not saying it's all about plastic, but it's about all these factors, together. And so it is a highly personal piece, even if it's happening halfway around the world. It's just at such a heightened level. And it's not because, people want to see that happen. It's because there's simply, in poverty, you just don't have the resource to spend the type of money we spend on keeping our environments clean. I mean, that's expensive, and we spend on it. It's in our city taxes here. It's built into our cost structure.
It's royally, it comes back to economics.
I mean, in the end, you got to, in all these cases, follow the money. It usually becomes very enlightening.
Yeah, it is interesting. So with the TerraCycle Global Foundation, one of the interesting things that I see and I really appreciate is on your website, you have a section in here that says, how do we partner with you? Partner with us. Can you talk a little bit about how either an organization, an individual, or another can partner with you? I think there's a couple things listed, but I'm sure you're.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna start with the individual, right? So
Sure.
we are a public charity, so we do rely on donations, and so you can donate through the TerraCycle Foundation. That's TerraCycleFoundation.org website, and we welcome any level of donation, to the cause. And where that money goes is directly collecting and cleaning up rivers all over the world, focusing in right now in Thailand, and the new projects coming up in India. So that's one way. Another way is look at who is funding, like the big funding sources, which would be like the Coca-Cola Foundation, the PepsiCo Foundation, and tell them they're doing a good job, because that will show that they should do more of that. And it may even encourage other organizations to be a part of it, right? So it's important to applaud organizations out there that are making sizable contributions. I mean, big 6-7 figure amounts to help this move forward, and those organizations have done that. And then if you're a company, we'd love to hear from you and think about how we could partner on an even grander scale to be able to bring these solutions and other solutions in the future to bear, and really do them consistently and for a long period of time.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think that partnering factor is, I think, other agencies partnering with you. I think, right now you're working with, local on the ground organizations and others. I think that really helps drive an impact, right? When you try to do it all yourself, it's hard, when you're not in the market or you're not physically there, but having local on the ground support and other organizations that already have a infrastructure, I've found has really driven impact more than otherwise. So it's cool that you're doing that as well.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you were to tell an individual, like we were talking about earlier, that it has to has to feel personal to them. So it has to touch them. So when you're
Yes.
talking about something that technically really touches everybody
Yeah.
and really should impact everybody, it's not as specific as cancer, as vast as that is, or another illness that might connect with one person over another. This really should connect with everybody to some extent because, like you said, we're drinking water that has plastic in it. So really, that affects everyone. So when you think about it like that, and then you could potentially have organizations that work with you, what would be if you had, say, 5 bulleted points, although I'm sure they could be vastly elaborated on as well. But if you were
Sure.
to tell an individual so that they could see this as I could do a few things every day, or maybe just within the next month, I could do something that makes an impact so that it seems a little bit more in their reach to make that impact. Because you were saying too, it
Yeah.
seems so like so large of an issue. Some people have an issue maybe even wanting to try and jump into it to be a
Yeah.
solution because they think I don't know how to make an impact. If you were to tell a specific person or give advice to an individual, what would be a few things that you could say you could do today that would make an impact and help support your cause?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I would do is echoing what we said earlier is really think about what I purchase and think about a purchase as we are actively voting with money for the future we want, with the what things we buy. There's one thing I could leave this whole conversation with, it would be people centering on that. And that's hard. And I'm just as much a hypocrite as everyone else, you know, it's really hard, but that would be the first thing. I would at least be eyes wide open. Then I would think about making sure that I'm sending a message with my voice and with my money to companies that are really trying to make a change and applauding them, and the opposite to companies that are silent on the topics that I care about. I care personally about waste, so I would focus there, but people may care about different things as well. But I think I would highlight to use my voice in my day-to-day activity. So I don't need, you know, it's not to change my life completely, not to reinvent everything, you know, drop everything. You know, people have a lot going on, a lot to think about, but to use my voice, you know, comment on, you know, these companies' social media accounts, you know, people, they do read those very, very clearly. And most importantly, to think about how do I vote with my money? That I think is, and then, you know, if you've done that, then you can really broaden, right? And I think go to much bigger places and, you know, and think about how to get even more involved.
Great. Yeah, because I think people, we've talked about this before, but I think people sometimes are intimidated, and then maybe intimidated isn't the correct word, but they know the importance of it, but
Yeah,
then it just gets washed away with their day-to-day
it does.
issue, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
everybody is drinking water. You need water to survive. So if your water is polluted with garbage, then this directly is impacting you. So to have a few things, tiny things that you can think about every single day makes it more manageable. And then I think, like you said, then it's a jumping point for more engagement with a cause. But
yeah,
those are great tips because they're easy to do. It's just a
yeah.
little extra thought. Just put a little extra thought into certain things that
Yeah,
you're
and
already going to be
realize your
doing.
power, right? Like
Yeah.
realize, in fact, how much power you wield. I mean, that's, you know, pretty amazing, right? I mean, we wake up and we're like, oh my God, I am way more powerful in the world than I ever thought I was.
And that's a takeaway too.
Yeah,
And we all love power.
right? Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I know we have we're running against time here. Any closing thoughts? Anything else that you feel relevant to? I mean, you shared a lot of great information. Really appreciate the time that you took. I mean, this is awesome.
Well, no, I mean, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you guys. Really, you know, thank you, Amanda, Ashley, and Brad for your time today, and thank you for, you know, spreading awareness to the TerraCycle Global Foundation. I mean, please, folks, do check us out at terracyclefoundation.org. And I really appreciate you caring about, you know, this topic and thinking about it and talking about it, and hopefully you know, people will leave with a little bit more empowerment. And if anyone's interested in the work we do, definitely check us out, and we'd love to share with you and get have you be as involved as you'd like to be.
Awesome.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And before we go, I want to share. I read in your book. I laughed several times, and I know
Yeah.
you have. I can tell you're a very very humorous individual. Um, my favorite thing that you write about is the mummified hot dogs. You're
Oh
like,
yeah.
you know, you love mummified hot dogs. And before we leave, my favorite thing I think you wrote was burying people in boxes is probably a bad idea. If you just buried them in the ground and composted them, you'd have less of a chance of becoming a zombie.
There you go. That's right. That's right.
I'm like, there we go. I'm not going to get incinerated or be buried in a box. I'm going to make sure they compost me.
There you go. Why not, right? You return to the earth even faster.
Yeah, exactly. So
Super.
Thanks so much, Tom. I really appreciate your time. Hey, Warriors. Thanks for tuning in. On the next episode of Civic Warriors, we'll talk with Ron and Natasha from Nork Trust for Education about the future of education and how to make a difference in your community. Make sure to subscribe to Civic Warriors, and thanks for all your support. Have a great day.